Welcome back to the Empowered Learning Podcast, where we explore ideas that help leaders, educators, and entrepreneurs grow and thrive. Today's guest is Lisa Riegel, an educator, researcher, and author who has spent over 2 decades studying the intersection of brain science, behavior, and human systems. In this episode, we unpack how the brain processes information, how emotional memories shape perception, and why 2 people can experience the same moment very differently. More importantly, Lisa shares how understanding these filters can help us shift from reactive habits to intentional leadership. Let's dive in. Hello, Lisa. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you responding and reaching out and saying, hey, you'd like to be on the podcast. I'm excited for our conversation, and I know that you've got some very unique takes on things, and it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of dive into that. So again, appreciate you being here. To get started here, let's just dive right into the deep end. How do you think understanding brain science can impact mental wellness, right? We usually kind of separate those out and not just performance or behavior. How would you respond to that?
So I think the key thing in brain science that a lot of people don't understand is how we form perceptions.
Okay.
So when the way our brain works is our in our limbic system, there's a little section called the thalamus. And this is all in the unconscious part of our brain.
Okay.
And the thalamus's job is kind of like the data manager. So it takes in all the
Right.
sensory information from the environment. And then the first thing that it does is it goes into our amygdala where our sensory memories are stored and it says, what is this like? It tries to make
Okay.
associations between now and the past. And so
Okay.
like what happens then is our perceptions form based on the way that our brain has organized our
Okay.
emotional associations with past events or past
Okay.
stimulus. So it's kind of like I always use the example of like a strainer, like when you're making spaghetti. So there's
Yeah.
holes in the strainer. So these
Right.
filters that get formed in our amygdala are kind of like strainers. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you think of like a banana representing reality, if you
Okay.
push the banana through these strainers, at the other end, it doesn't look like the banana anymore.
Sure.
So
Right.
our reality and our perceptions of reality it's still a banana, but it doesn't look the
Mm-hmm.
same. So you and I could be at the same event and have a
Mm-hmm.
wildly different experience. And it's all based on how our brain puts these sensory associations together. So
Mm-hmm.
part of being mentally well is self-awareness. If you can
Okay.
figure out what are the filters I have in my brain and how do I start to the CEO of my brain, that prefrontal cortex, that's where our thinking and our personality and all, our morality and all of those things live. So if we understand that maybe there's a filter in our brain that we don't want, like that, we it's causing us to have stress in situations we shouldn't, then we can start to have some self-awareness and some self-control to send the traffic down to our brain to tell us how we want it to interpret our reality.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. That's a very logical take. It's probably not something that a lot of people think about, but appreciate you kind of breaking it down like that. That makes a lot of sense. So awesome. So we got a lot of things to dive into. But before we get into that, just tell me a little bit about your background, upbringing, I guess kind of what brought you to the point where you and I are talking today on this Zoom meeting. Tell me a little bit about
Sure.
yourself.
So I was a teacher for 9 years. I was
Mhm.
an administrator for a couple years, and
Okay.
then I had the opportunity to do my doctoral work at Ohio State. And I
Oh, nice.
studied leadership, but I was really interested in the people side, the human system, and what motivates us, what engages us. And so I've been doing consulting for many years, working with leaders on how to engage their teams, working with
Okay.
teachers, how to engage students. And then about 5 years ago, I really started to have this kind of epiphany that real change starts in the brain. Like the brain
Hmm.
there, and we can study that and we can understand that from a brain-based approach instead of a social scientist approach.
Hmm.
And so I really dug into that. And what I talk to people about is that all of our behavior, whether it's academic behavior or social behavior, is really the intersection of our biology and our context. So if we
Wow.
understand the biology, kind of like, the perceptions, if we understand that and how that impacts our stress regulation system, we can gain that self-awareness and we can also learn how to self-regulate. And then
Mhm.
ultimately we're in self-control. And then the second side of the equation is the context. And so then we think, okay, how do we control our context so that it's positive and it's safe and it's supportive? And how
Right,
can we be more proactive so that we're in
right.
control? So that really kind of took me down the journey to expand beyond social science to move
Hmm.
into actual biology. And then,
Hmm.
lately I've been working with schools on how to set up a neuro well culture that's
Hmm.
safe, supportive, and proactive. What are routines you can put in place? How do you reframe behavior issues that you see through a biological lens? Because when we have a better understanding of what's going on, then our solutions change and become more aligned.
Right, right. I love that. I want to make sure that I got that correct. You said biology was the context between you had two there, and I missed the second
Yep.
one.
It's behavior is the intersection between
There we go.
biology and context.
Thank you. I knew you would remember exactly what I'm talking about, but I'm like,
Yep.
oh, I didn't catch it. Okay, one more time here, and then I'll get it down here
Yep.
correctly because it seems like that's an important aspect of this whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. It's really the foundation is that all behavior is the intersection between biology and context.
There we go. Love it. Very good. Very, very good. So I guess to that point, that makes complete sense to me. Again, a little bit maybe flies in the face of other things. What if this is new thinking, what is the thinking that I guess you're trying to overcome's not the right word, but maybe see things from a different vantage point. Like that's not how things are currently happening in education and leadership and this kind of stuff. How is this different and how is this kind of a game changer for everything?
Well, I think part of it is that so much of our classroom time is spent
Mm.
about control. It's about
Yeah.
control,
Yeah.
compliance,
Yeah.
conformity. And
Hmm.
when you understand, a couple things, when you understand that that context is not going to be safe and supportive and proactive for kids, you start to understand how your context is actually exacerbating problems. And the second piece is I think that in schools a lot, people judge character as the reason for behavior. And
Mm.
character really has nothing to do with it in the moment. It has all, 80% of the traffic in our brain is below our nose. It's in the part of our brain that is not conscious. So by the time the conscious part of our brain, I call it our CEO, by the time the
Hmm.
boss of our brain gets that information, there's a whole lot of thinking that's been
Sure.
done unconsciously. So
Right.
I think understanding the biology and context helps teachers to understand that what I'm seeing right now doesn't
Mm.
necessarily have anything to do with right now. It
Right.
has to do with the culmination of the whole past and how the brain has associated emotional responses to various stimulus from the environment. And so
Hmm.
it helps teachers keep their professional hat on instead of taking things personally and then escalating situations. And I
Yeah.
and I hope that it helps them to develop a little more empathy for
Mm. Yeah.
students
Right.
because it's no fun to feel out of control.
No, I completely agree.
And I see a lot of the practices that we have going on in schools are not aligned with how the brain is working.
Mm.
The behavior plans and the
Right.
way the discipline systems and
Hmm.
it's not, like for example, one of the things I tell teachers is if you're throwing a kid out so that the principal or a dean or a guidance counselor can de-escalate them, your context, behavior is biology and context. So you've sent
Hmm.
them to a different context with different sensory information. So they might be super calm there and rational and everything else, but the minute they walk back into your context,
Correct.
nothing's been resolved and it's just going to escalate again. So we end
Right.
up in this loop. And then,
Right.
kids miss a ton of instruction time. So when they come
Right.
back in, they're not intellectually safe because they don't know what's going on. And then their stress system escalates again.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I love that. And that, I mean, we could probably go off on that tangent, and not a tangent. It's a very, very applicable and important aspect of education. I would like to call it reform. I don't know if we're to the point where we're needing to, or people have admitted that we needed to reform it. But I had Dr. Justin Bear on a while ago, and he and a few other folks that I've talked to just are just feels kind of like they're finally holding up a mirror to like this is what you're doing as teachers, as leaders, and this kind of stuff. Is that working? Okay, it's not working. So let's dive into this. We are smarter, right? We are educators. Let's not go on information that is 30, 50 years old. Let's say, what do we know about the brain? What do we know about just child development at this point? Is what you're doing even appropriate for the age level of what they are. Then you add
Right.
on top of that all of the complexity, to your point, that's going on in their head. And I tried to write that down. I couldn't quite encapsulate it, but it was something to the effect of like the behavior that we see has so much going on behind it that we say, oh, well, this kid is a bad kid because of X. Well, this kid has 1,000 other things that you have not dug into, and
Right.
addressing all of the pre-existing, not conditions, but pre-existing facts that are going on in their life. And we're dealing, I mean, it's kind of like a doctor just dealing with the outcome, right? Where we're not like, let's get to the source. Like, why is it that this is
Right.
happening, and how can we do it differently?
Right, exactly. And I've heard teachers say before, well, I had his brother and he was fine, so I don't know
Yeah,
what's wrong with this
right.
kid. But
Same.
what's, the issue is, yes, maybe they've had some shared experiences,
Hmm.
but that person is a completely unique individual.
Hmm.
And even if they've had shared experiences, the
Right.
way that child's brain has made associations between what happened and emotional response, it
Hmm.
might be different than the other
Yeah,
child. And so there's
correct.
no comparison between siblings.
Hmm. Hmm. And I'm sure you've obviously having your doctorate, you've probably done more research in your however long 2 3 year process that I've done in my entire life. I don't I don't envy the amount of research and that kind of stuff that you've done. One of my favorite education reformers is and I just lost his name. So here's our brain fart moment here. Fantastic. Dadgummit. I say he's my favorite, and then I can't even think of his name. Oh my goodness. Okay, here we go. Take two. So one of my favorites is Sir Ken Robinson, and he has this
Yeah.
video talking about the idea that our education system is very much based on the industrial model, the industrial revolution model, and
Yep.
for whatever reasons, we have not changed how education works and how we kind of push kids through this system. This is what we want them to do, and it frustrates me that, I've been in education now over 20 years. I don't see the dramatic changes that kind of shone a light on of like, okay, is this really what we want to do? Kids are not the world that they're coming into is not what it was 20 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. So
Right.
like, wake up, folks. Like, we need to change how we're doing stuff.
Well, and I think, I read an article recently about student disengagement, and they said it's
Mm,
not a matter of disengagement.
okay.
It's a matter of irrelevance. And,
Mm,
when you think about, I always try to align purpose and practice. And when you think about what was the purpose of school, well, it started out so that we could vote. Then, once then it became Renaissance man, learn a little bit about everything and be an educated human. Well,
right.
then
Right.
the internet democratized information. So then it became about career
Correct.
development and career pathways. But with AI coming into our world,
Correct.
nobody knows what those are going to look like. And
Right.
so,
Right.
we're preparing kids on pathways to nowhere. And
Hmm.
so they don't find it relevant and they're disengaged. And my challenge for educators is, what do kids really need to know? What do we need to be preparing them for in a post AI world? And I would argue that,
Hmm.
being emotionally regulated, being able to think, being
Hmm.
creative, being able to, look for the gap. Like I have a 23-year-old and a 20-year-old, and they're very nervous about AI and what that's going to do
Hmm.
to their
Sure.
professional pathway.
Yeah.
And I told both of them, I'm like, that you need to look for the gap. AI is
Hmm.
not going to do
Hmm.
everything, so you've got to
Yeah.
find the gap. But that takes thinking. And currently, right now, our schools are teaching a very much compliance and completion mentality. And
Hmm.
that's, some technology is going to do that for us. We don't need to comply and complete. We need to
Right.
be disruptive and creative and fill that space. So I think that, education has never really let go of the things that it's always done. It just keeps
Mm.
trying to add more on. And so people are exhausted and there
Yep.
isn't a clear alignment between purpose and practice.
I could not agree more. And I think that I mean, you said that you are a former educator. Obviously, you're still in the education space, just doing different things, trying to make a difference, right? And again,
Yep.
every educator gets into education to make a difference, not to be a millionaire, right? So our hearts don't change. We just kind of shift as to how we do that. But as a fellow former educator, would you agree that, all of the things that you listed as far as the frustration and the irrelevance aspect of things, um, added on top of like what you just mentioned, as educators, as education system, better to say, education system, rather than eliminating the things that are not working, what do we do? we added on top, we added on top, we added on top. So the amount of work that is expected of teachers now is not less, it is multiplied. And
Right.
half of that stuff is probably not even relevant to what it is that they're currently doing right now.
Right, 100%. And I
Mm,
think that the accountability movement, where we started aligning teacher data with teacher quality, was a
yeah,
disaster.
I
Because
completely
what
agree.
happened is we transformed teachers from teaching kids to
Mhm.
teaching content. And I
Correct.
think in a post-AI world, we need teachers to teach kids,
Mm,
because what we are going to need is not content.
hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Teachers need to teach kids
Yeah,
because, I mean, to that point, it's the amount of content that is available, readily available to anybody that has a smartphone right now dwarfs anything that we've ever taught in the past, right? So I kind of, I don't know, it's not even joke. I relate it to education that is kind of trying to resist this idea of change when it comes into AI is like standing at the break of a wave, holding up your hands, trying to stop things. Like, good
right.
luck with things. It's not going to happen. You're going to get bowled
Nope.
over. Um, so you're going to be, washed up on the sand. You're not doing your kids any service at this point. And again, back to the point that you talked about before, isn't our job preparing them for going into the world and being successful,
Right.
citizens at this point? How is resisting the reality of what is current and what is coming in the future? How is that benefiting them in the future?
Right. Well, and I think a lot of teachers are very insulated. You know, they went to school and then they graduated and then they went back and worked in schools. And
Right.
so I think the perspective of what the world of work is limited to education. And
Mm-hmm.
when they get an opportunity to branch out from that and really understand what is the world of work and
Mm-hmm.
what are the characteristics they need, it changes their perspective. I used to
Right.
run in the state of Ohio, I ran the Economic Education Summit, and we
Okay.
brought together career tech superintendents and business leaders in the community. Now, this was literally like 15 years ago, and 15 years ago, they were talking about we need thinking skills, we
Mm-hmm.
need self-management skills, we need
Right.
emotional regulation, you know, all of those people skills that when you're teaching content, you're missing. But
Right.
when you teach kids, you're developing. And I think teachers do feel this overload, like I can't be the social worker and the parent and all these things. And
Mm-hmm.
I get it and I understand.
Right.
However, if your focus is on the kids,
Right.
it's not one more thing. It's you're
Correct.
infusing opportunities for life lessons and infusing skill development. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a really concrete example. A lot of teachers in elementary schools do like wiggle time, you know,
Mm-hmm.
where because the kids need to move.
Right.
Currently, right now, it's most teachers do some type of movement break, you know,
Right.
but they're using it as a way to control the classroom. So the kids
Mm-hmm.
start to get squirrely, and then it's like, oh,
Right.
we need a movement break. So it's almost like a punishment to
Right.
say, hey, you guys have been bad, so now we're going to move. So what I talk about is doing learning sprints. You know,
Okay.
how to like have like 8 to 10 minute learning sprint. And at the end of that learning sprint, then you have a little bit of a brain break. So this aligns with what we know about attention spans anyways. Kids
Mm-hmm.
can't sit for 20 minutes and listen to somebody just talk at them. So then when you have your learning break, you know, you have a sprint and then a break, sprint and then a break. So you go back and forth. And then during
Mm-hmm.
that break, you're doing that's an opportunity to teach. So you could say, you know, hey, turn to your neighbor and pay him a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
Or turn to your neighbor and tell them one thing you love about yourself that they
Right.
may not know. Or
Right.
draw for 5 minutes. Or let's do some movements. Let's stretch. Let's just get
Right.
up and stretch. Or, you know, so it can be a mix of whole group and individualized stuff. But I
Right.
think teachers use the wiggle break right now as a classroom management tool versus a learning tool.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And not to get on my soapbox again, but as a former elementary teacher, I saw I don't think that I did this, maybe on a bad day. I probably fell into this, but how many teachers, when they're frustrated, use this? I mean, you mentioned it as a punishment. What do they do? What's the first thing that they threaten to take away?
Recess.
Recess. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that is the one thing that they need the most, right? I,
Yes.
I get it, and maybe that's at a separate time if they can't keep their hands to themselves. I understand all that, but like you are robbing them of the one thing that they are. It is so obvious that they are saying that they need. They cannot
Right.
sit. I mean, and again. don't get me on started on treating kindergartners like we used to treat second and third graders with the amount of content we're throwing at them.
Yeah.
Sit and get right. I mean, that's not appropriate. It's not appropriate.
Yeah. There's a really good book by a guy named Robert Keegan that
Okay.
talks about, I'm trying to remember the title of the book. I have it in my office here, but it talks about the developmental stages and what people are actually capable of doing. And
Mm,
it kind of underscores what you just said. There are, we're asking kids to do things that are beyond their cognitive abilities, and
correct.
then we're punishing them when they aren't ready for it.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. I'm sure in your research you have looked at outside the United States because as much as we would love to think that we have it all together, I think research, if we're going by research, because we are educators and we are learning people, that we look
Yep.
at the numbers, right? There are so many international schooling systems, education systems that just blow ours out of the water.
Yep.
I have a couple in mind. I'm thinking like I saw something the other day about Japanese schools having there's no custodians. There's no
Right.
custodians, there's no lunch ladies. Like this is something that they teach them from the beginning. Take care of your stuff, clean up after yourself. We
Yep.
all pitch in together because this is a community. We are all learning and eating together and this kind of stuff. It's just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
like that does not seem like it's that revolutionary. And then you look at again because we are obsessed with scores. Then you look at their scores, and again, I'm highlighting one. I know that you could probably think of three or four other ones. They're crushing us in test scores, which is not what
Yep.
it should be all about. Yet they are spending so much time developing the entire person, not just these rote memorization things.
Yeah. Well, and Finland, in my book, Neuro, while I talk about learning communities and student jobs and how important it is that you're teaching kids, I always say that you're not always the main character of the story. Like
Hmm.
sometimes you're a supporting character. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes kids think that, they're the main character in every scene of every story.
Yep. Yeah.
But,
There's more than that.
yeah, and they actually in Spain they do something really interesting. Some of the schools there, the teachers eat lunch with the students in a
Mm,
family style, and they have conversations and they talk about the
mm.
news of the day and they talk
Oh, I love
about,
that.
different things that are happening in the world and how kids feel about it. So it's one of those things where you're doing the break, but you're using it as a learning opportunity, and the kids pick up and serve the food and then take care of
Right.
it. The other country that does it really well is Finland.
Hmm.
And,
Okay.
Finland, they actually have the shorter school day. They have
Okay.
more recreation than we do. They have more time for teachers to work together, but they
Okay.
focus on that whole child development,
Right.
and
Right.
they blow us out of the water.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And again, we could spend all of our time here, which is not what we need to do. But just as a
Yeah.
highlight for anybody that's listening, is that if we say that we are educators and we are going by numbers, okay, then let's look at the numbers. Like it does not bear out that we are doing things the right way at this point. So
Yeah.
I want to shift though, because you have got an amazing book and product, NeuroWell. So I would love for you to be able to just share on the creation of that. What is your mission behind that, and tell us all about it.
Sure. So it is basically it's a framework. The first part of the book talks about why students are different, because that's something that I've heard over and over again is kids today are so different, and they are from a
Right.
brain perspective, their brains are different. And so I talk about the context that has created that. So, the media, like for example, I
Mhm.
grew up on Little House on the Prairie. I grew
Mhm.
up on Saved by the Bell, like shows
Yeah.
like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And those shows were about doing your part, about
Mhm.
forgiveness, about saying you're sorry when you make a
Sure.
mistake, about family, all of those things. Kids today grow up in a media context that's like, you and I are going to get together and manipulate that group and vote her off the island, right? So it's all about
Yeah.
kicking people out and lying
Mhm.
and scheming and
Right.
manipulating. And that becomes a worldview, which becomes one of those filters in our brain through which we perceive reality.
Mhm.
And so kids have, less trust in the world around them. Social media is another issue. And one of the things that everybody talks about how negative algorithms and things, but one of the other things is that when we have online personas, we don't create something worse than us. Our online
Mhm.
persona is something better than who we
Sure.
are in real
Right.
life.
Yeah.
And so when you go from the online context to a brick and mortar building, you're walking into a building already feeling less than who you wish you were. And
Hmm.
that
Right.
creates, from a biological standpoint, it creates a stress on in your body. So your stress levels in your body are already elevated before you even get through the front door. The
Yeah.
other thing that social media does that is negative is it reduces the feel good of altruism. So if
Mm.
I'm on social media, I can post a new, cancer ribbon or a flag from a country, or, I can virtue signal things and I can get 4,000 dopamine hits from all the little likes from people. But in the real world, if you fall down and drop your bag and I help you get up and open the door for you and you say
Right.
thank you, I get one.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
one of the things I talk about in schools is we need to create an environment of cooperation and altruism so that kids get the opportunities to have multiple dopamine hits all day long for good things they're doing. And then there's parenting, there's mental health, there's all these other
Oh yeah.
contexts. So the first part of the book talks about that. Second part of the book goes into a deep dive of the brain science in layman's terms that are easy to understand.
Okay.
And then the third part introduces a neuro-well culture, and it's the idea of how do we make schools safe, supportive, and proactive. So that safety is, emotional safety, intellectual safety. The supportive is like how are we building skills? How are we helping kids feel a sense of agency and self-control and power versus conformity and compliance? And then the third is proactive. And, we have a lot of reactive, just like the wiggle breaks, those are reactive.
Mhm.
How do
Right.
we build proactive practices? And then the fourth section's about how to influence that change in the home to add
Oh,
positivity.
okay. Right.
So I've been working with schools to help them, transition. And I say NeuroWell is not a new initiative. It's a pair of glasses that have a
Mm.
brain-based lens in them.
I love
So
that.
when you look at your practices, you start to look and go, oh, well, that
Hmm.
works really well. And look at that. It's aligned to the brain science. No wonder it's working well. And other things that you're like, well, maybe I could tweak that and I could get a lot more impact, or I could
Mm.
close some of the gaps that I see in my classroom by
Right.
adjusting how I teach and how I assess and how I set up
Sure.
routines and climate in my classroom.
Right. Right. No, I love that. Um, I'm looking over to my notes here, and I have all these questions that I didn't even scratch the surface of just because we were having a fun conversation. Um, so I apologize for that aspect. Is there anything else? Because again, I don't feel like I dove into all of the amazing work that you're doing. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we kind of shift gears to kind of wrap things up? Because I want to make sure that you have every opportunity possible to kind of share what's new and exciting and what your vision is that we can share with the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing I would say is that change doesn't happen in a week.
Mm,
So
yeah.
it takes, our brains learn that our brains are like a highway with exit ramps. And so, to build an exit ramp in our brain takes repetition, experience, and emotion. And
Hmm.
we have lots of automatic exit ramps, some good, some bad. You might have one that says when I'm stressed, I drink, or when I'm stressed, I eat. They become automatic and you now ate a half a bag of chips and you didn't even think about it. So we have kids that come to us with these exit ramps and we need them to build a new one. But it
Yeah.
takes a lot of energy to
Yep.
build a new one. And so going back to those dopamine hits, dopamine gives us a little hit of energy. So, the solution to pollution is dilution, and that is
Mhm.
positivity, positivity, positivity. And so
Mm,
how do we build people up instead of recognize when they've fallen down?
mm,
And so positivity is and celebration. It's something, even in my doctoral work, I studied leadership, and
mm,
school leaders might have high expectations and really low authentic celebrations. And that's the
mm.
fuel that we need to give people the persistence to
Sure.
sustain a change.
Right. Right. I love it. Thank you very much for that. That was great. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We'll put in all of the show notes as to where you can find out more about Neurowell and Lisa and all of her great work. So make sure you check that out as well. But to wrap things up on our podcast, we'd love to ask you some questions just to get your take on this. So you've obviously done a lot of research. I'm sure you've read thousands of books and ran into some amazing people throughout the years. Who is a leader that you most admire and try to emulate?
I would say from a professional standpoint, I admire Bruce Perry. So Bruce Perry is a psychologist, psychiatrist who has done a lot of research. It's called the neurosequential model,
Okay.
and he's done a lot of research around trauma. And I've learned a great deal from him. And what I really like about him is that he has shaken up the system. He's
Okay.
changed the way that people view, psychiatry and
Mm,
treatment, and it's aligned to the brain science.
okay. Awesome. Very good. Any, you said on the professional side, do you have somebody that pops in your head on the personal side? If not, that's fine. Just wanted to give you opportunity.
I think on the personal side, I mean, still sort of in a professional realm, but my
Mm.
first principal. My
Okay.
first principal, I didn't know how good I had it when I had her,
Hmm.
and then I had a string of terrible leaders, which actually is part of the reason I went on the pathway
Sure.
to study humans and
Right.
leadership.
Yeah.
But what I loved about her was that she understood the human system
Mm.
and
Right.
she fostered a sense of efficacy and professionalism. And when she was our principal, our staff couldn't be stopped. We were amazing.
Mm.
And the same staff under less effective leadership
Hmm.
turned into a whiny bunch of people who
Wow.
complained, who hated their jobs, the whole culture flipped from positive to negative. So she's the one that really helped me understand that leadership matters.
Hmm. Yeah. Power of a positive leader. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yep. Isn't that funny? Because I think there's a lot of educators that get into education, and I'm sure there's more than just these two reasons, but it feels like I've had a lot of conversations with teachers throughout the years. A lot of times it falls into one of those two categories. I had this amazing teacher, she inspired me, he inspired me to want to
Yep.
become this teacher, or I had this god awful leader and I was like, I will not let kids go through that again. And it's kind of the carrot or the
Yep.
stick, right?
It is for
Yep.
sure.
Yep. I love it. All right. Question number two. You strike me as someone that is constantly learning. What is the learning that has most impacted you in the last year?
I think really diving into why is society so stressed out lately? Like you
Okay.
think like in years past, we didn't have to like duct tape people to airplane chairs because they couldn't control their emotions,
Right.
and now it's like we have, the shootings and everything else. And I've done a
Yeah.
lot of reading, and I think, being able to look at the context so
Mm,
much more has changed the way I
sure.
consume news. It's
Right.
changed the way that I disagree with people. It's changed the way
Hmm.
that I word things and communicate with people. Um, so that's really
Yeah.
changed me professionally and personally.
Right. Right. No, I love that. And it's, I mean, you mentioned empathy before. I mean, I feel like that is a lost, oh,
Yeah.
it breaks my heart having two young men, and I feel like they've done a good job. But I mean, just the world that they're going into, it is not an empathetic world. It is a dog eat dog. Just look out for yourself. It's a nasty environment.
Yeah.
Not that we can't change that, but I mean, it's just the environment that they are entering is it's a rough world at this point. So, we all have to do our part to, like you said, just let's reframe this. Let's try to start kids off on a better foot, and that starts with teachers, right? How do we teach them a better way, a more
Yep.
positive way, where we're looking at not just the the outgoing action, but what is the purpose behind that? How can we help support kids to get through that? So I applaud all of your work. I'm excited to continue our conversation after this is done. I think there's a lot of fun things we can do. But to wrap this conversation up, our last question: how would you empower learning for future generations?
Well, if I'm being honest, I think we need a total redesign.
I would agree with you.
I think a total redesign that is human focused
Mm,
and more personalized because, especially too, as you think about AI, there aren't going to be the mass of jobs. So it's not like you have to create 100 people who just all say who's better at this technical skill.
mhm.
We're
Right.
really going to need to be unique and human in
Yeah.
order to compete against, the machines and the automation. And so
Sure.
I think that the future generations, either school is going to become obsolete,
Mm,
and there are some AI folks that are predicting within 10 years we won't even have schools,
mhm.
which is scary. But I think if we're an exciting and terrifying time to lead. And if
Yeah.
people are willing to really look at a total redesign, I think that what they're going to find is that kids are going to be happier, healthier, and more successful academically and personally.
Right. Well, and again, I don't want to dive all the way back into our conversation, but just to kind of put a bow on this, because I do think that it relates back to this, is that what is our focus, right? What is our goal in education? Is it to give information for them to spit back to us, or is it to how can you think on your feet? How can you be empathetic in this situation? How can you communicate and collaborate with people that you've never come into contact with? And at the end of the day, what are skills that AI cannot replace? They're
Right,
people skills, right? They're communication skills. There's leadership aspects. There's you know large language models is not going to replace that. And it
right,
it is a terrifying time, to your point. Um, I would hate to see and hate to imagine a future where education and schools do not exist. Yes, we need to adapt. I completely agree. It does need to be this total redesign, but we've got to shift our focus. It can't be on rote memorization, completion of this kind of stuff. I completely agree with
right.
you. So,
Well, and I think the one other thing too is that AI, so this cognitive offloading that AI does for us. So as
mhm,
we, like we don't memorize phone numbers, we don't,
right,
we don't have to because technology's done that. It
right,
reduces our executive functions because we're not
mhm,
using them over and
correct.
over again and we're not
Yeah.
developing that. And the thing that makes me scared and sad is that
Mhm,
this part of our brain is what makes us and makes us
mhm.
human. The rest of our
Wow.
brain's just an animal brain. So
Yeah.
if we don't start to pivot and really
Mhm,
think about how are we developing this part of the brain, not just adding files to go in storage about a
mhm.
war or a, science process or something like that. If we're not really developing that CEO of the brain, we're going to lose our humanity.
Mm. Wow. We don't want that. So
No,
everybody
no.
do your part, right?
Yeah.
Engage with Dr. Riegel. Thank you so much for this conversation. I mean, honestly, we did not know each other before we started this conversation, but reading through your stuff, and obviously you kind of resonated with the audience and what we're trying to put out there. So kudos to you for seeing education for what it is and doing everything in your power to I think of it like the little starfish story, right? The mom or the dad and the little girl are walking along the seashore, and there's all of these fish or all these starfish that are kind of washed up on the shore, and she's taking one at a time and chucking it back in, and the um, jaded father said, "What difference does that make?" And she's like, "It makes a difference for this one." So
That's
we all
right.
need to do our part and do what we can. So thank you very much, Lisa. This has been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You bet. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Thanks again to Lisa for helping us better understand how our brains shape the way we see and respond to the world. The key takeaway: awareness creates choice. When we understand our perceptions, we can pause, challenge our assumptions, and respond with greater clarity and intention. If you found value in this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's passionate about growth and leadership. Thanks for listening to the Empowered Learning Podcast. See you next time.